Good afternoon. I'm Mike Dewalt, I'm Chairman of our Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors. And on behalf of our Board of Directors and Dan Chilton, our President, and our Marshall Chamber of Commerce Business Committee, welcome to you all. Appreciate you coming out. We're very honored today to have Governor Tim Pawlenty here with us today. Governor, we know you got a very busy schedule. We appreciate you coming out. We're very honored that you can come out and talk to us. We know these are challenging times in our business community and education as well. And so we appreciate you taking time to come out and see us. On behalf of the Marshall Chamber of Commerce, would you please join me in welcoming our Governor, Tim Pawlenty.
Thanks for coming out in the middle of the afternoon to talk a little bit about the future of our state, some of the issues that I think will be both a challenge and an opportunity as we try to move forward and improve our state and quality of life in our state. It is great to be back here in Marshall, which we rely on so heavily as one of the great regional centers and areas of leadership for our state, particularly for southwestern Minnesota. And so what happens in Marshall is really important to the future direction to the whole state, certainly the whole region as well. Before I go on with my comments, I'd like to make a couple of quick introductions, one of which is our Commissioner of the Department of Employment and Economic Development, otherwise known as DEED, Dan McElroy, and he is charged with overseeing the department that relates to grants, loans, and incentives, and programs that relate to economic development with a particular emphasis in greater Minnesota. So if you have some suggestions or compliments, I'll take them. If you have some criticisms, you can see Dan afterwards. And of course, we're joined by our great minority leader of the Minnesota House of Representatives, Marty Seifert, who is here as well. And Tracy, I think, was here earlier with one of the, Tracy's in the back. And we're very grateful, and there are other public servants here as well. And I know that politicians are often the brunt of jokes, and maybe for good reason. But when we have people of Marty's caliber who are willing to step forward and say, you know, for a period of time, I'm willing to give a chunk of my life and my family time and potential income and other endeavors and the like to serve our state and my community, I think it's important that the rest of us, regardless of party or politics, appreciate that and respect it. And so, Marty, thank you very much. One of the great things about being governor is you hear these stories as you travel around the state. And I heard the one the other day of a high school coach whose team was just terrible. They were lethargic, they were trying, they were unenergetic, and he had had enough. So he was going to go give them the what for in the locker room. So the team was gathered in the locker room, and he flung open the door and he said, "Listen up." He said, "Did Michael Jordan ever quit? Did he ever just lay down and quit?" The team yelled out, "No, coach, no, Michael Jordan never quit." They said, "Well, what about Wayne Gretzky, the great one? Did he ever quit?" The team yelled out, "No, coach, no, Wayne Gretzky, the great one, would never quit." And then the coach said, "Well, what about Elmer McAllister?" The room went completely silent. One of the players said, "Well, we never heard of Elmer McAllister, coach." The coach said, "That's because he quit. That's why you never heard of him." So that's just a little story about, you know, we, all of us individually, collectively, have some challenges and some bumps in the road, as it's always been, as it always will be. But we also know that one of the secrets to our success is making sure that we charge ahead and that we deal with our challenges and problems, hopefully through hard work, but also innovation and preparation for the future. I want to share a few thoughts with you today, just in the short time that I have, about three things, recognizing there are many, many other topics as well that go into the success of our country and the success of our state. But as we look forward to the 2009 legislative session, three that we think are deserving of some priority or some focus, and again, not meaning the list to be exhaustive. We have kind of labeled this an E3 initiative. We just started to talk about this publicly really within the last day or two. E3 standing for economy, education, and energy, recognizing that they're all intertwined, you know, inextricably intertwined. And so as we talk about the economy, for example, we know that we can't have a successful climate for economic success in Minnesota unless educational system, because if you don't have a requisite skill or education to connect to the economy of today and tomorrow, you're in deep trouble in this economy. And similarly, as a country and as a state and as individuals, if we don't get a handle on this energy crisis, it's going to continue to drag down our economy in really powerful and challenging ways. So I'd like to just spend a little time on each of those three with you, and then open it up for your questions or comments or reaction. Just quickly, by way of the economy, it's obvious both internationally and really nationally, and of course in Minnesota and the upper Midwest, the economy is stumbling in a variety of ways. It relates to energy costs, it relates to the housing crisis and the subprime mortgage crisis, it relates to changing demographics in terms of the aging and changing nature of the population, and much, much more. But bottom line is the economy is stumbling. It is not growing nearly as fast as it was, 10 years ago or the like, and we have to make sure that we understand why that's occurring, try to make sure we prepare Marshall, Lyon County, southwestern Minnesota, the whole state, and really the whole country, to prepare for the future that's coming. And it has some tremendously exciting opportunities. It also has some big challenges that are coming that we have to realize are going to require a lot of change. And we can't just rely on the plan that was 20 years ago or 15 years ago or 10 years ago, for that matter, even 5 years ago, because there's a lot of change in the air. As to the economy, we spent a lot of time talking to business leaders, and of course the cornerstone economic opportunity for most of our citizens is whether they have a job or not, right? For some people, they're fortunate enough to own a business or be an entrepreneur, but for the vast majority of Minnesotans, the pathway to economic stability and economic opportunity is whether they have a job. So we really appreciate our quality of life in Minnesota. It comes in a variety of forms in terms of the outdoors and healthcare and infrastructure and some of the other things. But the bottom line is if our citizens don't have access to the right volume or quality of jobs, not much of the rest of that matters. Pretty much the rest of it goes out the window, or at least it's greatly diminished. So we're focused on what are those additional things we need to do to make Minnesota and southwestern Minnesota and Marshall the kind of place where people with capital and entities, businesses with capital, say, you know what, I'd like to invest in your town or your state. I'd like to build a building. I would like to add employees. I would like to buy capital equipment so that my employees or the functions that we perform are more efficient. I would like to perform some research and development in your state and hopefully commercialize some of that in products or activities in the economy that create economic activity and the like. So we asked these folks like that, well, what kinds of concerns do you have about Minnesota and our business climate? Our business climate in Minnesota, to put it charitably, needs to improve. We are regularly ranked, when I became governor, about the worst in the nation in terms of business climate. We have made some improvements over the last 6 or so years. We went from 49th worst to like 44th worst or 42nd worst. So we have some room to improve and need to improve in our business climate. There's lots of ingredients that go into a business climate, and different surveys measure it a little differently. But almost no matter which one you look at, we don't do very well. We're making some progress, but more progress needs to be made. One of the determinations of whether you have a job-friendly or business-friendly climate is how much does it cost to do business in your state or in your county or in your region. Those costs get measured by things like taxes, regulation, workers' compensation insurance, unemployment insurance, energy costs, and the like, and I'm down the list. And we don't have time to go through them all, but let me just touch on a couple. For 30 years or so, every governor in the state of Minnesota has said, look, we may not be able to be the cheapest place, but my goodness, we also can't be the most expensive place when it comes to cost. So Rudy Perpich said, we got to get Minnesota out of the top 10 in taxes, at least the top 10. Arnie Carlson said the same thing. Jesse Ventura said the same thing. And I said the same thing. And finally, a couple of years ago, we actually did it. We went from like 4th to 12th. So barely out of the top 10, and as a mixture of state and local taxes in the country. So there's some relative progress in terms of our competitiveness compared to the rest of the nation as to where people might want to deploy capital, build buildings, add employees, purchase equipment, and do continues to go up. We realize costs in government go up, labor costs go up, energy costs go up, and the like. They just can't go up so fast that they outstrip the rate of growth in our revenues, or that they dramatically outrun the pace of spending growth in the economy more broadly. So I've been governor for 3 two-year budget cycles. We budget on 2-year cycles in our state. So some people report these numbers, they just report it as 1 year. It's a 2-year cycle. The first 2 years I was governor, we had a huge recession and a big budget deficit. We increased the state's budget over 2 years 5.6%. Now, given the rhetoric that sometimes you hear, they think, well, Pawlenty took a blowtorch to the budget, when somehow went negative. And it did not. It never actually was cut. We slowed down the rate of growth to what was going to be about a 13% increase to about a 6% increase. In the next 2-year period, we had about a 12% growth in the budget over 2 years, and get more money, and the economy was prospering. In the 2-year budget cycle that we're in now, the budget's grown about 9.6%, and now we're looking at the next budget cycle with a recession, or just an economic slowdown, and revenues slowing down. But our revenues coming into the state, without any tax increase at all, are projected to grow about 7%. So that's how much money will come in over the next 2 years compared to what we're spending now, or revenues that we're collecting now, 7% increase. So there's a lot of debate that you're going to hear in the next 6 months, particularly as we get closer to the session. Some of my friends who take a little different view of these things than I do say, oh, that's not nearly enough. We have needs. We've got to, they say, we've got to increase taxes. We've got to get that spending up to 10 or 12 or 15% increase. And I just want to stop there and say, I think it's important that in these times in particular, but certainly in general, that government live within its means, just like you have to, just like your family has to, just like most businesses have to. And it's not as if we're saying the budget has to go cut. We need to have the increase be to live within the revenues that we have, particularly in a highly taxed state like Minnesota, one that is not necessarily friendly to job growth in businesses, at least to the degree that we need it to be. So that's a premise that we're going to carry forward into the session as it relates to our economy and economic outlook, which is state government should live within its means. And we should be able to live within a 7% increase in revenue growth, I think. And the reason I say that is if people have a job, keep in mind many people do not because the economy is tough, their wages are going up maybe 1 or 2 or 3% a year. The economy in the private sector, as measured by GDP, is growing, in the first quarter of this year, almost 0. Second quarter, 3.3% with the stimulus package, and they're predicting for the year it might be around 1 or 2%. Inflation is about the same, a little higher in government. So I don't think it's irrational. I don't think it's too tough to say we can live within that and should live within that. Now that means we're going to have to make some prioritized decisions, but I think it's important as we go into the session to keep that perspective to be competitive. I also think it's important that we're not just, I talk a lot about vetoes because I'm the goalie now. I'm an old hockey player, and we have a legislature that sends me a lot of, I think, bad ideas, including over the last few years. I mean, $1 billion plus in tax increases. And I'm not even including the transportation vetoes. I'm talking just good old-fashioned income tax increases they sent me, new statewide property tax on business, various other business taxes on research and development and royalties and the like. And I thought those were going to put us in a worse position from a business standpoint, so I vetoed them. But I don't want to just be playing goalie. We also have to do some positive things. And one of the things I think they also tried to kill was the Job Z program. I just left Pipestone, Minnesota, where Suzlon Wind Energy has got 500 people or so working in Pipestone in a Job Z zone around making large turbines for the wind energy sector, which is booming. I don't think they'd be here without that Job Z designation. I'd like to make the whole state more competitive, but absent that, we have to do these one-offs, which Dan does a lot, to say, all right, if you can't be competitive as a state, can we at least find some areas that can be more competitive with these specialized programs? They're not ideal, but it's part of what we need to do to get and attract and keep jobs. Suzlon isn't the only success story. We're going to be celebrating a Finnish company moving to Faribault in a little while called Moventus, which is also going to make parts for the wind energy production industry. Hydro Controls from Italy is opening an establishment of business in Red Wing. Cleveland Cliffs just announced yesterday that they're going to open a new biomass wood-burning energy facility in a Job Z zone in Orr. North American Avionics is going to open a facility in Duluth, and the list goes on and on and on. The point is, in the right environment, we're getting businesses to come in and grow, but most of them are saying, hey, if we had to come in under the normal Minnesota business environment, I think we'd be. An interesting comment about our economic competitiveness. So, as we go forward, two last things on the economy. We have a tax code in Minnesota that hasn't been substantially revised in 40 years. It really reflects kind of the thinking of the economy from several decades or really a generation or two ago. So it has things like quite high income taxes, quite high taxes on capital gains, quite high taxes on a variety of other kind of job-related categories. The thing I want to remind everybody is that 70% of the job growth in the country is not coming from the big companies. It's coming from entrepreneurs, it's coming from small businesses, it's coming from medium-sized businesses, it's coming basically from the Chamber of Commerce businesses around our state. 70%. So almost all the job growth is coming from small businesses. So we got to make sure we focus in on listening to these folks and say, we're doing it every day, deploying the capital, taking the risk, thinking about building buildings, thinking about adding jobs or subtracting them. But what is it going to take to get you to grow and be more successful in our state? And the tax code is going to have to be modernized. We recognize we can't blow a hole in the state budget by just whacking down all those taxes. But some of them are going to have to be reduced, and maybe some other taxes modified as well to offset the revenue. But we can't be living in the 1950s tax code with a 2008 economy. And I'm also thankful the legislature passed, with Marty's great help and leadership, a property tax cap. You know, they used to get this argument about Pawlenty, you held the line on state taxes, but you're shoving all the pressure down on the cities and the counties, so property taxes are going up. Well, that used to be the case maybe when we didn't give them as much LGA, but then they said they levy back for all the LGA, driving up property taxes. So now LGA is increasing again. That excuse, I think, kind of vaporizes. But more importantly, we said to the cities and counties, you can levy a local property tax cap no more than 3.9%. We wanted 3%. We had to compromise with my friends on the other side of the aisle. At 3.9%, we made some exceptions for police and fire. We also said, hey, if you want to go higher than that, go ahead. But you got to get the approval of your voters. If you want to go double or triple the rate of inflation like some cities or counties want to do. So we thought 3.9% levies pretty reasonable. So you should see some relief, or at least some slowing down of property tax pressures as a result of that. Beyond kind of tax and spending and cost issues, there are other ingredients, which gets to the second E, which is education. And a generation or two ago, if you were my mom, my dad, my grandma, my grandpa, you didn't have an education or a skill that was relevant to the economy, you could still go get a pretty good paying manual labor job and probably with benefits and support a family. You weren't going to get rich, but you could get by. Those jobs are mostly gone, as you know. And so the economy has changed such that there is an incredibly high premium on skills or education that are relevant to the economy today and really going forward in the future. It is not acceptable to have this many number of kids dropping out of high school. It is not acceptable to have this percentage of kids coming out of high school who go on to college or some post-secondary experience who have to have a remedial education because what they were supposed to learn in high school or before was never absorbed or learned or taught. We have a great educational history and tradition in Minnesota. We have teachers who pour their hearts and souls into learning, into children, and to education, and we are grateful to each and every one of them. They are wonderful, committed, dedicated people. But they work in an outdated system. You have this beautiful high school here in Marshall, one of the most best high school buildings in the state, and you got a great school system. But I would suggest to you that even in Marshall, we can do better. And the state can do better in terms of modernizing how this system works. The number one determining factor of how a child's going to do in school is their parents. Now, there's no great way to legislate or require everybody to be great parents. I wish we could do that. said, you got to fight over what? He said, well, this other kid told me that you weren't the best teacher in the school, and that just irritated me so much. Now, that's a little story about puffery and education. Now, we pat ourselves on the back in Minnesota, as we should, because we have the highest ACT scores in the country. We have amongst the highest NAEP scores in the country. On average, our Minnesota school children, even though we have our headaches and problems, do about as well as anybody in the country, on average. But those averages lie. They lie for two reasons. One is we don't compete against the rest of the country anymore, just the rest of the country. We compete against the rest of the world. And some of our competitors around the world are catching us and surpassing us educationally. And number two, the averages mask over the fact that the bottom third or so of our students are doing terrible compared to international benchmarking, compared to their peers, and just even doing basic things like graduating from high school. So we have a real challenge, even within those averages, what to do about that. There's a lot to do, but I'd like to just talk a little bit quickly about teacher quality. We do not have the same caliber of people going into teaching that we did previously. The current crop of people migrating to teaching as a profession is not where we need it to be. We need to do a number of things, starting with, if you want to go into educational school at colleges and universities, I believe we should have some minimum requirements about who goes to get to do that, like they do for doctors, lawyers, and other professions. Now, it doesn't have to be off the charts, but it has to be at least some minimum standards around that person's abilities and capabilities, I believe. Number two, once they're there, our schools of education in our universities and colleges vary wildly in their quality. Some are really good, some are not. And we have to get some standards and some rigor around what we expect from our colleges of education as they train and equip and deploy teachers into the workforce. I also think the exit exam, as before you actually hire to be a teacher, needs to be boosted up, because what we're doing now, the cut scores are low. You can fail big parts of the assessment and still qualify to be a teacher. We also, once you become a teacher, need to better utilize staff development time and money. Right now, 2% of the general education formula that we give to schools is dedicated to staff development, in-service training. Some of it is good, some of it is not. There's no standardization, no quality control. Some of it is hardly related at all to what particular teachers are doing in their area of expertise or their area of concentration. A lot of it is after hours, off time, off conference. It needs to be job embedded, it needs to be classroom relevant, it needs to go to the issue of what they're actually doing in class, and it needs to be rigorous. And so we need some better standards and oversight of that. I also believe, I'll just ask this question, how many of you, if you don't work for government, private sector people only, get paid just for seniority? It's the same answer I get everywhere. And I give this speech, a version of it 10 times a week across Minnesota. No hands ever go up. The rest of the world has moved on. They can define core mission for their business or their enterprise. They correlate the money to whether that progress is being made towards the core mission, and the money flows to whether success is happening. Now, in schools, and again, this isn't fashion, it's just modernization. What's the core mission of schools? It's not how we feel. It's not, whether we win the football game. It's not, whether we got a good, spirit. It's whether students are learning, what they're learning, how much they're learning, how fast they're learning, whether they're learning. And unlike 20 years ago, we can measure this with great precision. By district, by site, by classroom, by teacher. Now this gets very controversial, but we need to have a system that's, especially when 85% of the money is going into people, that the people are performing, as measured by whether students are learning. So we've got a voluntary program in Minnesota called QCon. Some districts get more money if they want to participate, some choose not to. It's a good program, but I think it needs to be expanded. And in fact, I would suggest to you, as the legislature, or as I propose, more money going to schools, I think we should demand, at least for majority of the increase, that it be tied to whether results are improving. Not more of the same, but for performance. A couple last things. We have to have in our schools a better way for people who are not just going to be teachers for 30 years of their life to come into teaching for a while. It's called Alternative Pathways into Teaching. There are great models for this. Teach for America is an organization that goes out and gets the best and the brightest college students from across the country in high-end shortage areas like math, science, technology, and engineering from Stanford and Harvard, some of the best places around the country, and they say, well, you come and be a teacher, at least for a little while. And maybe even go to the most challenged sites in the country, the poorest, the worst, the most concentrated areas of disadvantage, and they're doing it, and they're having astoundingly good results. But we shouldn't have to rely on outside groups to have that kind of tempo and entrepreneurial spirit when it comes to recruiting teachers. Our districts should be doing that and replicating it themselves, because right now Teach for America gets a limited number of teachers. They go beg local school districts to take some. Sometimes the local school districts like to do it, sometimes they don't. School districts themselves should have that kind of outlook and disposition and tempo when recruiting teachers. Or on the other end of the career, if you've got a 55-year-old engineer who works for Schwann's and has made money, and she says, you know, I think for the last 5 or 7 years of my career, I'd be willing to dedicate my master's degree or PhD into teaching, there should be a pathway for that person back into junior high chemistry without having to go back to school for 4 years. Other places are doing this with great success. Minnesota needs to do this as well. People who are the generation behind me have 15 or more jobs between the ages of 18 and 40 years old. This idea that people are going to go into a job and stay for 30 years, we hope it happens. That's mostly not how the generation behind me thinks and works and feels about their careers. So that's not the only thing, but it's a supplement to teaching. We also have too many kids dropping out of school. And if you drop out of high school, there's a 60% chance you end up in the criminal justice system. There's an equal higher chance you end up on all the government programs, government housing, government transportation, government healthcare, government everything. Those are symptoms of people not having the skills or the education to get a job so that they can pay for it themselves. You can't drop out of high school and expect much in this life in terms of your success in most instances. So we have a lot of programs designed to keep people on track. But if we get kids to 8th or 9th or 10th grade, and it's pretty clear from their test scores, they're wobbling or could fall off the cliff educationally, we have to intervene more aggressively. If you're in the United States military or want to be, and you try to take the entrance exam and you fail within a reasonable range, you don't completely bomb, there's a program in North Carolina that puts kids into an 8-week intensive educational boot camp program, and they put 2 years worth of reading and math improvement into those students in 8 weeks. Now, what we're doing now in areas of concentrated disadvantage for students with disadvantaged background is okay, but it's not nearly aggressive enough. So we're going to try this, I won't call them boot camps, that's a military term, but at least intensive educational experience for kids who are reaching that late junior high, early high school pathway who are clearly at risk of falling off of the path. And then lastly, our friends in education, particularly higher education, are about to be visited by something called technology. And it's going to disrupt, in both a challenging way and an exciting way, educational services. The University of North Carolina, run by former Clinton Chief of Staff Erskine Bowles, has 90-degree programs online, 90, full degree programs. He said within 5 years, they will have more students graduating from their online courses and degree programs than they do in their traditional programs. Now, what's the significance of that? Why am I talking about that? Think about the generation that's behind me. How do they communicate? How do they share information? How do they socialize? How do they interact? How do they do almost everything in their lives, some of whom are in attendance here today, differently than we did? The answer is they have digital access to digitally stored information and transmit it, share it, learn from it in ways that are fundamentally different than the current generation. What this means for higher ed is, do you really think for much longer that generation is going to get in their car in Stillwater, Minnesota, and drive on Highway 36 in rush hour for an hour and park their car in a remote parking lot at the University of Minnesota in January and haul their bodies across campus in, say, 10 below weather to get into a lecture hall, hang up their backpack and their coat, and sit down and listen to an assistant professor blather on about Econ 101, sometimes the assistant professor being good, sometimes being terrible. Do you really think that's the future? Or do you think it's more like that person's going to get up and have a cup of coffee and sit on the couch and dial in an Econ 101 lecture from anywhere in the world whenever it's convenient for them and demand high quality? And here's the kicker. Once you have a program like that up and running, and you don't even have to invent it, you just go out and license them, the marginal cost of adding one more student is zero. Let me repeat that, zero. So you can go into the marketplace and say, you can take the Econ 101 class in the lecture hall, or if you do it online, we will give you a 50, 60, 70, 80% discount on your tuition. We're going to have a discussion about affordable higher education. We're going to have a discussion about whether tuition should go up 3% or 4%. How about having a discussion about cutting it in half for online programs? Now, this doesn't work for everything. It doesn't work for dissecting frogs, but it does work for many things, like Econ 101, Econ 102, foreign languages, and many other classes. So I'd like to see our higher education institutions start to move in this direction. It's already happening through Capella University. It's already happening through the University of Phoenix. And I will suggest to you, if they don't do it, it will happen to them. In 20 years, the landscape for higher education is going to look fundamentally different than what it looks now because of what I'm describing. And so we can either go out and get market share and lead this, or we can wait until it happens to us. I prefer to lead it. I went too long, but I want to just touch on the last thing, energy. Obviously, we have an energy crisis. We can't have a successful economy when energy prices are going through the roof. We got way too much reliance on foreign oil that destabilizes us and threatens us from a national security standpoint. It destabilizes us from an economic security point because the roller coaster highs and lows are too steep and too unpredictable. So we need to Americanize our energy sources. That means we've got to get our hands on as much traditional energy as possible. It also means as quickly as possible we need to transition to as much renewable, next generation, cleaner energy that we possibly can, as long as it makes economic sense. And so I won't go through it all, but we've got some challenges. We need next generation biofuels. What we've got going in Minnesota is nation leading on renewable energy, but we have a need to transition from what we have now to cellulosic ethanol, so we're not using just food to make fuel, but we're using waste products to make fuel, agricultural byproducts to make fuel. We got a booming wind industry. We want to keep that going with all the incentives that we have at the state and federal level. We're going to need to, I think, reopen the debate on nuclear energy. We have a law in Minnesota that prohibits any additional nuclear power plants from being built. I think that should be revisited. We don't have enough transmission. I know that's controversial because nobody wants the lines in their backyard. We understand that. But as the state grows, as the economy grows, as we increase the number of people, we cannot get to where we need to be with the current transmission capacity in Minnesota. It has to expand dramatically. We have to support and encourage that. And I would also just leave you with this thought from Marshall. If there are folks here who are interested in these issues, we passed, the legislature passed with Marty's leadership, $20 million of micro energy bonds dedicated to cities who are willing to create either individual-based renewable energy, either wind, solar, geothermal, individual-based energy opportunities for their citizens, or a municipality can use the bonds to collectively build something to power a subdivision of homes or power a collection of government buildings with these new technologies. The revenue bonds are available, and the idea is you pay back the revenue bonds either from the energy savings you obtain relative to your current expenses, or if you're generating energy from the revenues you get from selling the energy back to the grid. So I would invite Lyon County officials or Marshall County officials, City Marshall officials, just check that out, see if it might have some application in your community. Thank you for listening to longest living people, second to Hawaii in the country, got the healthiest people in the country. We've got a diverse economy ranging all the way from traditional agriculture all the way to the world's leading medical device technology companies and everything in between. We got great natural resources and outdoors. They need some help, but we've got a great quality of life in that regard. Our people are engaged. We have the highest voter turnout in the country. We got highest charitable rates of giving per capita. We've got highest rates of volunteerism. And the list goes on and on and on. We're really proud about Minnesota, but we want to make sure that it continues to be moving forward in a positive direction. I think these three areas will help in that regard. So thanks for listening. If there's some questions, comments, or reaction, I will be happy to have. Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions, suggestions, concerns? Complaints? It's a shy group here, Marshall. Somebody's going to have somebody have some thought. Anybody? Usually it takes something to break the ice. Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Global climate change, the regulation for doing something about it, will happen from the federal government, Midwest Governors Association,
Yeah.
work, what else?
The question was climate change or global warming, what's going to happen, national, regional, state. My view of it is this. The Earth has always been warming and cooling for natural reasons. And in my view, the weight of the evidence now suggests at least some of that is attributable to human behavior. We can have a debate about whether that's a little bit or a lot, but I think it's fair to say on the weight of the evidence that some of it is caused by human behavior. So it makes sense to, within reason, take steps to try to reduce that effect. But we should do that in a way that doesn't wreck the economy. And with this energy crisis, people in Congress and legislators and me are understandably very sensitive, hypersensitive to anything that's going to add any more cost to energy. So we are concerned about, I'm concerned about climate change and global warming. I think we should take reasonable steps, but I'm not willing to take stupid steps or steps that are going to dramatically increase energy costs. So where does that leave us? Well, first of all, I don't think it makes sense for any one state to try to tackle this by themselves because you become an island compared to the other states you're competing against on energy costs. Number two, the best thing would be for the national government to address it, and I think they will, regardless of whether Senator Obama or Senator McCain gets elected. They both have some tolerance for doing something on this issue, and so does the Congress. So I think you'll see early next year some sort of federal action. As to the Midwest Governors Association, I think it's okay for us to look at it, regionally continue the homework and the research, but I think we would be out of sync by jumping ahead or trying to do something unless and until we see what the federal government is going to do. That makes the most sense. It doesn't make sense to one-off this state by state across the country. So we're in kind of a wait-and-see mode pending the election and into the next congressional session. Yes, sir, in the black shirt.
What is the likelihood of job Z continuing on?
Question was, what's the likelihood of job Z continuing on? And again, for people who don't follow the details of this, it's job opportunity building zone. It says to employers or would-be employers, if you'll expand or grow in Minnesota, mostly in the areas that have not grown as fast as other areas or experienced decline, we'll give you some tax breaks for 12 years. And it's working. And Dan, maybe you could just jump up and give the updated statistics on the results. Just yell them out from there. I can't hear you.
Yeah, the law went into effect in 2003, approximately 400 job opportunity building zones. They led adding 5,600 jobs, retaining about 6,000 jobs, more than $650 million in capital investment.
So not to make this partisan, but my friends on the other side, I want to kill it. Mostly because I want it. There's these games that get played at the legislature. If I want something, then sometimes they genuinely don't like it, but sometimes they like it, but they want to pretend to try to kill it so they can trade it off for something else. So they'll say, all right, we won't kill it if you give us our thing. So there's some of that goes on behind the scenes. I'm sure that's a shock to you, but there's a proposal just out now to kill it. So we had a proposal last year it's a 12-year program, but the clock starts from a couple of years ago, 2003, so 3 or 4 years of the 12 years already eroded. We wanted to extend the program or have the clock start ticking 12 years from whenever you actually got up and running as opposed to some arbitrary truth is, I think they'll leave it alone. There's enough Democrats, particularly in rural Minnesota, who are saying, hey, leave this alone. I think we're okay. Yes, do that.
Follow up to that, are you going to be proposing to roll out your rural renaissance in the last session with the Job Z and the other rural economic development?
Yeah, we have we have another program called SEED, Strategic, we'll give you the E's, Dan, Development. It's kind of a stupid name, but the idea is it's seed money, seed capital, seed incentives, and we proposed a good chunk of bonding and a good chunk of cash to go into this program last year. We got about half of what we wanted. On the bonding side, some infrastructure money, bioscience grant money, and basically capital improvement money for cities and counties. We did not get granting from the legislature most of the cash, so we're going to try to come back and ask for that again this year. Although we're going to have to be careful because we've got an economy that's slow, we've got a budget deficit that's not going to be as bad as was originally projected a year ago, but it's still going to be there. But this is the kind of thing that actually could generate more money, generate more jobs and tax revenue. So we bring most of it back as a proposal. Yes? Question was No Child Left Behind, which is the federal law, and not to oversimplify, but it basically said, you know, you got to have a quote-unquote highly qualified teacher in every classroom by a date in the future, with some definitions of what that meant. It also then uses different tests state by state as to whether students are making adequate yearly progress each year. And if you don't make adequate yearly progress, you start to incur potential penalties or reorganization of your school. The intent of law, I think, is pretty good, which is we'll measure, see how you're doing, and if you're not doing well, then there'll be some consequences and some accountability. Problem is, it's flawed and it needs some tweaking, not elimination, in my view, for this reason. You know, they have AYP designated for different subcategories of students, and if any one subcategory is behind, even though it may only be, you know, a small percentage of the overall student body, you could be deemed a failing school just because that one subcategory isn't doing all that great. Now, we don't want to make excuses and say that certain students or subgroups can't learn or shouldn't be held to the same standard. I think it's unfair to say a whole school or district is failing because, you know, 1% of one school site is not doing well. So I think some latitude around some of those issues on testing, frequency of testing. I'd also say if you're the kind of school that's acing your tests all the time, giving you some relief from the frequency of that would be helpful as well. So I think there's some good tweaking that could be done. I think overall it should be kept. Yes?
Governor, as you know, one of the big headaches for employers and job creators here is healthcare, concerns about diseconomies of scale, access to newer expanded services, just keeping the person on the health. The idea is how we tackle that.
Yeah, thank you. On the issue of healthcare, there's kind of three buckets of issues. One is access. The other is cost, the other is quality. And when people talk about healthcare, they sometimes zoom in on one part of it, but if you want to look at it holistically, you got to look at all three. For the 93% of Minnesotans who are insured, one of their main concerns is cost. And so the question becomes, how do we get cost to be more reasonable? By the way, this is the thing that is killing the budget of the United States government. It's breaking the back of your state government. It's really putting pressure on counties and school districts and cities. This issue is beyond just, you know, what do we do for health? It's really a basic economic issue. But here's the problem with our healthcare system. If I said to you today, on your way home from this meeting, go buy a television and don't pay any attention to how big it is or the quality or the cost, I'll pay for it. Don't even worry about the cost or, you know, the effectiveness of it. How many of you would arrive home tonight with a 12-inch black and white? Anybody? You would all show up with a, you know, probably a flat screen, nice, you know, probably expensive TV. That's analogous to what's wrong in our healthcare system on the cost slice. Because all of us get to go to the doctor, the hospital, the clinic, who are insured. We consume goods and services, in most instances, not having any idea whether what we're getting is any good or not, or what it costs. A third party, namely the government and HMO or an insurance company, manages and pays for the relationship. cost and quality and have somebody else manage and pay for it and expect that to work. It defies what we know about human behavior. It defies what we know about markets. So here's what we did with our state employees, and I'm proud of this because our unions were fed up too. I mean, they were breaking the backs of their members. So we said, we're going to tier the providers by cost and quality. We said to our employees, you can go anywhere you want. You choose within this broad expanse of providers. But if you choose to go somewhere that is poor in quality and high in cost, you're going to pay more. If you choose to go somewhere that's high in quality and high in efficiency, you'll pay less. Guess where they go? They have migrated to the more efficient, higher quality providers. Healthcare quality is improving, and 2 years ago, our premium increases for the state employees was 0% premium increase. 0%. This year they were saying plan for 10%, they're 3%. Because people are making better choices. If you give consumers good information, easy to understand about cost and quality, and then give them a financial incentive to make wise decisions, they generally do. You got to put up some guardrails so they don't get abused as consumers in a complex transaction. But it's working. And so that's the kind of reform we have to drive in healthcare. And it's really important for where most of the money goes, David. There are 5 conditions where almost all the money in healthcare goes. It's cancer, diabetes, heart disease, obesity, and end-of-life issues. And where you go get your care, if you have one of those conditions, matters a ton on what your healthcare outcomes are and how much it's going to cost. And I'll give you one actual example. In Minnesota, do you know how many diabetes patients until recently were getting best of class Mayo Clinic level care for their diabetes? 8%. 8%. So we started to say through a program called Bridges to Excellence to our providers, we will pay you more if you will use these Mayo Clinic level world-class diabetic treatment standards. And now we got it up to about 30%, and guess what? It's saving us money, even though we're paying the providers more, because the other side effects of bad diabetes treatment are being reduced. Less transplants, which are super expensive, and down the list. So that's the cost piece of it. On the access piece of it, in terms of greater Minnesota and the ability to have access physically without having to drive a long distance, that's a real dilemma. And I think some of the things we're going to have to look at is what kind of additional incentives, through payments or reimbursements or otherwise, do we need to make ensure we got some adequate infrastructure of healthcare distributed fairly and geographically around the state. There's a third issue, which is just people who are uninsured, and I won't go into that. It's another huge issue because of the interest of time, but those are a couple of quick thoughts. The reform we passed last year is pretty good. It's not complete, but it's pretty good on moving the ball on these issues I just described. Including, by the way, if you got one of these 5 chronic conditions, people get paid more if they assign you a chronic care coordinator. I don't know if any of you have ever gone through a serious health incident, but my goodness, unless you're a lawyer, I mean, it's impossible to go through the maze of companies and holding companies and testing companies and nurses and doctors and clinics. I mean, so the idea of having basically a quarterback for your chronic care management for the whole thing to help you through it can improve quality and drive efficiency. We'll do one more, then we better get out of here. Yes, sir.
Governor, back to the education question. There's been a great deal of conversation about measuring the quality of the school, not only based upon meeting standards, but also how well you're doing in attaining that standard, the growth money.
Yeah.
I know you have some pretty strong feelings about that. Can you articulate those a little
I
bit
can.
and share some of that?
Well, in teachers, I have to be careful how I say this. Individual teachers are very reasonable about these things. Some of their union folks get a little testy. But nothing's going to get done unless they're owners of this process, because, first of all, politically they're very powerful. But more importantly, you don't want to impose something on a group of people that have to do it every day when they're in resistance. So we have to figure out a discussion point where we can say to our teachers, help us design this and be part of leading it rather than just saying no or having us try to dump it on your heads. That's not going to work, and we don't want to do it that way. So we're meeting with their leadership to see if there's some common ground we can forge on this. Mostly what I hear from teachers teachers who show up in my classroom, or my students. And so it's not fair to judge me or test me compared to, you know, the school down the street, or a dine out, or some other place, because, you know, the neighborhoods are different, the socioeconomic situation is different, even within a county, it's different. So, you know, it's apples and oranges, so they're concerned about the measurements being fair. So there's a model that would say, we don't care particularly, or I shouldn't say we don't care, we're not measuring you based against somebody else. We're just measuring you based on whether you can take your students as you find them from September to May or so, and see if you can, as a percent, improve their abilities to some reasonable degree. Not compared to, you know, Rochester, again, just compared to Marshall. Can you take an 8th grader in reading or math and move the needle from September to May for your class or for your site, a reasonable amount? And if you do, that should be worthy of additional pay. If you don't, that should be worthy of concern. Compared to yourself, not compared to somebody else. So this growth model or student achievement model is getting a lot of national attention, but we have to have this designed with teachers, because if they say it's goofy and they don't buy into it, it won't work. So we're going to spend a lot of time to try to figure out how we can best do that. But you know, 20 years ago, with medicine, it was a person in a white coat saying, "Trust me, this is the way to do it." Sometimes not. You know, now we can measure that stuff. In education, we can now measure it. And we can't just throw money at stuff and say, "Gosh, I hope it gets better." We got to be able to see whether it's getting better. And if not, we got to be able to try some different stuff. Okay, thank you so much for your patience and listening this afternoon. If you have any aspect of this you want to continue the discussion on, or have suggestions that we didn't get to, please, Dan McElroy is reachable. You can call my office, or Mark